The Next Generation introduced a great Starship trope that Star Trek has only used 3 times since Star Trek. The Next Generation introduced a new Starship feature that the franchise has only used 3 times since its introduction. Set about 100 years after Star Trek, the original series, TNG used the state-of-the-art USS Enterprise D to show how Starfleet's technology had improved since the 23rd century. From more efficient communicators and transporters to improved medical treatments, the United Federation of Planets made a lot of technological progress between TOS and TNG. Not only was the Enterprise D much larger than the Enterprise of Captain James T. Kirk William Shatner, it also boasted several features that Kirk's ship never used. One of the coolest new features of Captain Jean-Luc Picard's Patrick Stewart Enterprise D was the ship's ability to separate into 2 operational halves. If the Enterprise became engaged in a dangerous battle, the ship could separate its saucer and drive sections. The senior officers could then take control of the drive section to fend off the threat, while the civilians and families were ferried to safety on the saucer section. The Enterprise D's ability to separate was put on full display in TNG's premiere, Encounter at Farpoint, but the ship only used the maneuver a handful of times after that incident. Although the Enterprise D and many subsequent starships were built with the ability to separate, the saucer separation maneuver was reserved for emergencies. Star Trek has only employed the move on 3 separate occasions since the Enterprise D last employed the move in Star Trek Generations, once each in Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Beyond, and Star Trek Discovery. In Voyager Season 4, Episode 14, Message in a Bottle, USS Voyager's holographic doctor, Robert Picardo, visits the USS Prometheus in the Alpha Quadrant. A new experimental warship, the Prometheus can separate into 3 warp-capable vessels to attack enemy ships. Captain James T. Kirk Chris Pine is forced to initiate a saucer separation of his Enterprise when Krall Idris Elba attacks the ship in Star Trek Beyond. Krall temporarily interrupts the separation sequence before LT Nyota Uhura Zoe Saldana manages to complete it. The maneuver comes too late, however, and the Enterprise's saucer section crash lands on the nearby planet Ultimate. Most recently, the USS Discovery demonstrated its ability to separate in the Star Trek Discovery series finale, Life Itself. In a battle with the Breen, Discovery uses a separation maneuver to jump the Breen dreadnought to a distant location using the Spore Drive. Although the ability to separate was built into the Enterprise D from the beginning, the saucer separation sequence proved expensive to shoot, and producers felt it slowed down the story too much. Because of this, the ship rarely employed the maneuver, even in times when it would have been helpful. Still, considering how complex and dangerous the move could be, it makes sense that Starfleet vessels would only employ a saucer separation in particularly unique situations. The sequence also looks great on screen, and it would lose some of its appeal if Starfleet ships were separating all the time. The Starship Enterprise is one of the most iconic elements of science fiction, representing not just exploration, but also a certain brand of heroism and resilience. Throughout the franchise's history, Star Trek has made use of countless tropes that resonate deeply with fans, one of which stands out for its impact but has been rarely revisited. Introduced in Star Trek: The Next Generation, this trope centers around the Galaxy-class starship as a family vessel, something that has only appeared sparingly across the various series since, despite its tremendous potential. A ship full of civilians in The Next Generation, TNG, the USS Enterprise D wasn't just a ship designed for scientific discovery and military action, it was also a home. Crewed not only by Starfleet officers, but also by their families, it introduced a dynamic we had never really seen in science fiction before. The idea of bringing families on board a starship added emotional depth and complexity to the show's storytelling. Captain Jean-Luc Picard's initial discomfort with the presence of civilians and children aboard the starship was well documented. It became a central aspect of his character development over the series. Early on, he questioned the wisdom of housing entire families on a vessel that might easily find itself in danger. This tension was key to the early tone of TNG, as it forced the show to balance the inherent risks of exploration with the human need for connection and belonging. In a way, this was Star Trek's answer to the Cold War mentality of the time. Instead of presenting a purely militaristic future where soldiers and scientists were isolated in space, TNG embraced a more optimistic vision, one in which exploration wasn't just about war or diplomacy, but also about creating a sustainable community that included everyone from the highest-ranking officer to the youngest child. The emotional weight of civilians in space, what made this trope powerful was the emotional weight it carried. Aboard a starship filled with families, every dangerous mission took on a different tone. In episodes like Disaster, where different parts of the ship were damaged and non-crew members were in peril, the stakes felt incredibly high. The series also explored what life was like for children, like Wesley Crusher, who grew up in this unique environment, where parents were constantly facing life-threatening situations, and friends could be lost in an instant. Another memorable episode that touched on this theme was The Bonding, where a young boy, Jeremy Astor, loses his mother on an away mission, and the crew has to deal with the after-effects of that trauma. These types of stories couldn't have happened in Star Trek's earlier iterations, where the crew was solely composed of Starfleet officers. By incorporating families into the Starship environment, TNG created opportunities for more personal, intimate drama, where missions weren't just about survival, they were about how people handled the aftermath of violence and loss. Rare reappearance of the trope, despite its dramatic potential, the idea of starships carrying families has been revisited only a few times since TNG. The most notable is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which featured Commander Benjamin Sisko raising his son Jake aboard the space station. However, unlike the Enterprise D, Deep Space Nine was a fixed location, a space station that allowed more grounded, community-building stories. Though civilians were central to the narrative, it was still a departure from the families on starships trope. The trope made a brief but notable return in the short-lived Star Trek Picard series, where Picard once again confronted the implications of his life aboard a starship, though the presence of families was more of a background element. In the episode Nepenthe, we see that William Riker and Deanna Troi have settled on a peaceful planet to raise their children, far from the dangers of spacefaring life. Their decision highlights the toll that such a life can take on families, even suggesting that for some, leaving the stars behind was necessary for the safety and well-being of their children. Similarly, Star Trek Voyager only touched lightly on this idea. Despite the show's premise of being stranded far from home, the ship was notably free of families, with the exception of Naomi Wildman, who was born aboard the ship. The series focused more on the found family dynamic rather than having actual families on board. This left some fans wondering why Voyager didn't experiment more with the theme, especially considering its lengthy and dangerous journey through the Delta Quadrant. Why this trope deserves more attention: the idea of civilians aboard starships isn't just about raising the stakes in a dramatic situation. It's also about the kind of future that Star Trek envisions. By depicting a starship as more than just a tool for exploration or combat, TNG offered a future where space was a place where life could be lived fully, messily, with all the joys and tragedies that come with family. This trope offers Star Trek a unique opportunity to explore the human condition within its futuristic setting. It provides a balance between the grand adventure of space exploration and the deeply personal stories that can arise from ordinary lives. In the few times it has been used, the impact has been powerful.